Okay, well, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Meeting of Port of Newport Budget Committee. It's Tuesday, May 12th, and the time is 8:07. And I'd like to start off with introductions, especially for our new freeholders. So maybe we can go around and introduce ourselves. Jim Burke, Chair currently. Why don't we go to, I'll just go through as people show up on the screen. Jeff.
Jeff Lackey, Commissioner.
Okay. Mark.
Which one?
Oh, sorry, Mark Farley.
Mark Farley. I guess I am a what did you call me?
Freeholder.
Freeholder. Excellent.
Okay, Rex Capri.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Rex.
At the bottom left of the screen.
Okay.
There you go.
This. Yeah, Rex Capri, new freeholder.
Okay, welcome. Jeffrey Johnson.
I'm Jeffrey Johnson. I believe I'm a new freeholder as well.
Okay, Dave Smith.
Good morning, I'm Dave Smith.
Welcome. Okay, the next step is the election of a budget committee chair. Do we have any volunteers? Paula, do you have any insight or input towards that?
No, nobody has come up with as a volunteer before, so I'm not sure. Whoever would like to precede the meeting for the rest of this meeting, would love to have you.
Jeff Lackey, were you interested in that?
I can. I was thinking normally it was a freeholder, but maybe that's just the way it's been. I don't know if that matters.
It doesn't have to be a freeholder. It could be any member of the committee.
Okay, I can do it.
Okay, I move to select Jeff Lackey as Budget Committee President. All in favor? This would be for the freeholders and myself.
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
I will second that, Dave Smith.
Okay, second from Dave Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let's go to the budget message. This is Paula.
And so from now on, I guess Jeff will be the one preceding the meeting, Jim, so.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Okay, so do we have an agenda?
Yes,
Did I overlook that?
it is actually on our website. Just
There it is.
Page 3.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got it.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Budget message, Paula.
Yeah, so again, I would like to welcome everyone, especially the new committee members. Thanks for being here today. I have sent out the budget message, and basically, you know, this has been a difficult one to start with because obviously here we are getting to the end of our fiscal year, getting into the new budget, and we're encountering ourselves with a lot of issues with this COVID-19. So trying to figure out how much that is going to affect our current fiscal year and our future budget, because that would certainly affect some of our current revenues that would be passing on to the new year. But looking into it along with Mark B, we find that it hasn't affected us as much as it has affected other ports. I've been in communications with a lot of ports, and apparently some of them are having a difficult time, and that has a lot to do with the type of business each port runs. Luckily for us, we have a very diversified portfolio that really helps in keeping things afloat. Our losses have not been so far much more than about $25,000. And moving forward, we still don't know how that would affect us, because, you know, as it affects some of our tenants, some of our users, it may affect us somehow. But so far, everything is still looking good. You know, the one that has been affected the most, it's on the recreational side, it's South Beach, with the ramp being closed for part of the time, and the RV park only being restricted to folks staying longer than 30 days. But even then, the fact that a lot of folks could not use the ramp as general public, some people have purchased mortgages, and a lot of people have decided to stay long-term at the RV park. So some of those have almost replaced each other, you know, one source of revenue for another. And Mark has done a good job in trying to keep up with that, and we started capturing those cancellations and so on since January, just to see how that affected us. So for this proposed budget, we're dividing this into 5 separate funds. The NOAA Lease Revenue Fund, the Facilities Maintenance Reserve Fund, the Capital Reserve Fund, Bonded Debt Fund, and the NOAA Capital Maintenance Reserve Fund, and finally the general funds. To start the new fiscal year, we're looking actually quite good. We have a network capital and general operating fund of more than $4 million, and more than $9 million in total funds. And partially too is because one of the projects we had for last year, which is the Dock 5 project for Dock 5 Pier construction, it didn't materialize last year because we didn't get our grant until it passed what we call the in-water work for being able to construct in water. You will see some increases in some revenue categories, and this increases our effort to provide more realistic projections. So additional margin resources are projected as a direct result of the increased rate for the commercial marina. And the purpose for some of that was to do some upgrading on the electrical system for the marina. So, last year, apparently, the port recognized that there hadn't been much increases on the international terminal. So that was done since 2014, apparently. So that was done last year, which helped increase those revenues, and it showed during this last year's this current budget, and that made a major difference in how we're performing. So this year we decided to do an increase of 4% overall, and that is based on the CPI, so cost of living, and the 10% for the mortgage at the commercial marina, and that is an agreement with the commercial fishermen during the commercial fishing users group. And the reason being is that there are a lot of electrical upgrades that needed to be done. Those upgrades come up to over $600,000. So it was something that actually $655,000 overall. And the reason to do that was to allow the port to every year do about a third of that. And you'll see that on the budget as a capital improvement. So that is very important for us to get it done, because that is, again, a sort of an agreement with us and the commercial users, because it can be a liability for everyone here in terms of safety issues. So you'll see that last year we refinanced both the GO and the NOAA bonds, and you'll see how that affects the budget this year. Not so much on the GO bonds, because that is just a direct savings to the public, not necessarily to the port. But there was a savings of over $800,000 to the public. But the NOAA bonds, it's a savings of over $2.5 million overall for the term of the loan. So that the bond, and that is a great savings for the port overall. This time you're gonna see some changes in how we're doing or we're capturing some of the funds for the port, the funds, the revenues and expenditures. And the reason being is that way we understand how each area is performing. So we broke that into profit cost centers, like the administrative, South Beach, commercial marine, and international terminal. So some of the capital expenditures will also be shown on those areas. And it's just a little bit easier for us to see how those things were broken up. You probably have some questions about that, because if you compare what we had this year with last year, it's a bit different. But we're going through some changes here. First, we didn't have a director of finance for a couple years. Our staff has done a great job for what they had, but things were captured not necessarily in the best place. So we're trying to make some of those corrections and really give you a very transparent way of showing where those revenues and expenditures are going. Some of the expenditures we have prepared for this year, it's based on the survey that we received from HR Answers for the salaries for the staff. We are trying to, basically they gave us a low, a medium, and a high pay for each category, each areas we cover here at the port. And we're trying to at least reach up to the minimum. So some of those folks will be a little bit above, but I don't want to have anybody below that, because we're trying to keep up with the market. I think one of the reasons we're at this situation, and it seems like a major increase, is just because we have been off for so long in terms of our pay here. It may seem like a huge jump, but again, this is HR Answers is it's a company that does a lot of human resources work, and they've done a research all throughout the areas to see similar jobs and what they're paid. And so we're trying to, again, to catch up. And we'll be happy to share with all of you. Well, we had shared that with some of you who asked, but we'll certainly be happy to share with any of you who wish to see a copy of that survey, or at least a matrix of that survey. We also included, again, additional funds for communications. I do have a list here of all the work that Summit has done for the port and the PR side. And Angela has done a fair amount of work. And quite frankly, I really think it has shown in how the port is viewed outside, and the general public. Because in the past, folks didn't have any idea what the port did, and I think we're keeping a constant communication, and I think that's important, and it's also important for our stakeholders, the legislators, and all folks involved in our in our business one way or another. We also we're planning few plans. As we have some projects, we're trying to have plans for those projects, because every time we go out for a grant, they typically won't give you one if you don't have a good plan and how you're gonna come up with that project. And so at this time, we are trying to put together a plan for the international terminal to do a better outreach, better performance of, there are a lot of money put into the infrastructure. What do we do from here, and also the annex out at the RV park. There's, I think for a couple years now, there's been interest in doing some plans to revamp that area, but it's been kind of put to the side many times. And so we're trying to at least get that plan put together so we can start that process. And then of course there's the Port Dock 5, which we have plans to get it completed this year. We did receive our EDA grant of about 50% of the total $2.4 million cost for the project. We're already in process now of looking. Pretty soon you're gonna see an RFP looking for a management for that project. But of course this got to be approved in order to get to that point. And we will continue looking for grants for all of these funds. If for some reason we don't receive the monies to get this moving, obviously some of the, especially the capital projects, won't get done. But it's important to have them listed, because if they are not listed, we can get them done. And if we don't get the money, we just move on to the maybe next year or so on. And the port also is looking into possibly building a new port building to house the staff here. We've been in this little RV building for the past 8 years. It was supposed to be a temporary building, and it posed a very difficult situation for us, especially during this COVID-19 time where we're supposed to have certain distancing, and we are like crammed into a small space. We really need more space if we're to hire more folks. We talk about getting even an intern to help here that we could have get for free, but we had no place to put that person. So yeah, it definitely poses a difficulties for everyone here. We have no break room, and it's something that I think it needs to move forward. This is one project that is very easily postponed, and it has in the past, because you're always going to want to put the other projects that are out for the users first. However, eventually this got to get done. This is never going to be at the very top of the priorities, but it got to be some priority. And other small projects we have is, the rogue seawall plan study that is being postponed as well. And then, getting the hoist, the electrical hoist work done, getting now there's also a dredging study that we would like to get completed, because we are getting funds from the Corps. And that's a good amount of money for free. I mean, there's always string attaches, but what that will do is, if we were to get the Dock 7 replacement eventually moved forward, we also got to make sure there's enough depth that we can bring the right size of vessels into that area. So this is a very important step in getting starting that project, and the Corps had offered to this year, we're doing $100,000 free of initial study. And if that moves forward, then they will do a feasibility study, which is in the 900s, which we have to pay 50%. And but I think it's important to get that done. And that's very unusual for the Corps to do those type of projects. They don't tend to dredge outside or do any work outside of the channel, the main channel. So Aaron has done a good job working with the Corps and getting into this one pocket of money that it's usually outside of the typical annual federal funds that they receive. So anyhow, we have provided you with the packet with all of our recommendations. Most of those are based on the strategic plan. We try to narrow down some of the projects that we find that are important. Some of those are because they're important to the users. Some of those are providing additional revenues to the port. And some of those are really needed in order to avoid liability for the port. And whatever we're proposing here and gets approved today, or if you decide to have another meeting to approve this at another time, you know, later once approved, we can only change it by 10% throughout the fiscal year without having to get back to this group again. Obviously you have the choice of making some adjustments. And again, on the staff level here, we just try to focus on efficiency and reducing costs to the port and creating ways to bring more revenues to the port and its stakeholders. So we again appreciate you being here. And sorry this is such a long one, but because we have made so many changes and we got a new director of finance, there were a lot of things that we want to make sure to cover this time. So that's about it. Any questions?
If you have questions, remember to take yourself off of mute.
Any questions for Paula? Okay, so a couple things before we move forward. Has anybody heard from Walter or Gil? And
I
were they,
wonder if they missed the date.
anybody texted them?
I did, both of them.
Okay, all right, well, wanted to say thank you to the freeholders for volunteering your time. We appreciate that. For this meeting, everybody's probably been on Zoom meetings by now. The raise hand feature works well, but also sometimes informally works well as long as there's not too much crosstalk and we can kind of see, you know, how we want to go with that, you know, as it unfolds. So I guess we're ready to move to overview of proposed budget with Mark Brown.
So good morning. Again, thank you so much. So this budget was put together with a lot of input of staff for a lot of the general materials and supplies expenses. We looked back up to 4 years, compared what they were spending against what they were budgeted for in previous years, and tried to adjust the budget to make it at the appropriate level. In some cases, you'll see a reduction in the budget. I think international terminal utilities is a perfect example. We found that they were over budgeted. In other cases, you'll find increases in budget where we had spent money but had no budget. So it's an effort to balance everything out. Paula did a good job in covering the big overview. It is an effort to get things in the right places. You're going to see professional fees in some areas that seem extraordinarily high. That's because planning activities by their nature cannot be capitalized. They are an expense to they're recognized an expense. So when we're planning for a Port Dock 7 and we're saying it's $200,000, or we're planning for the dredging to expand Port Dock 7, those funds are actually professional services and not a capital projects. That's why the professional fees are so high in some cases. But as we get into specifics, we can share exactly what those are. I'm gonna leave it at that and see what questions there are from the get-go.
Mark, what type of questions are you looking for? Are we getting into the nitty-gritty, or are we staying kind of a overview?
You can get in the nitty-gritty if you want it. I or the other Mark will have the answers. We are going to, I believe on the agenda, jump into the different program areas. So either way works.
Well, if anybody has any questions now, or we could, Rex.
Yeah, I had some questions. On the first page, that form LB1 under financial summary, I'm looking at some of the proposed, and like you said, there's NOAA Mock P facility. It's a decrease of about 4.6 million, but I'm looking at commercial marina operations, and that's an increase of 6.4 million. That's looks like a pretty big jump from previous 2018, 2019, 2019, 20.
That is a huge jump. And the reason for the jump is most of the projects we've identified, there's $2.8 million in capital outlay projects. Keep the dock in working condition, replace pilings. Aaron, do you want to comment on it? Yeah, 2.5 million for Port Dock 5. Don't forget to go off mute.
Yeah, so this is we're talking about the projects that we're looking to undertake. Is that my understanding correctly, right?
It's really the projects that we're talking that have driven this up. Yes, because you have professional services and the project. I can get very specific on it.
My main points would be toward the importance of the projects, and the specifics can be found in the in this year's budget, in the line items, and then also in a strategic business plan. But we're at a point project-wise in the commercial marina where we've either got it to undertake these things, or we need to start planning to taking parts of the facility offline, especially on Port Dock 7, on the outer slips, or the outer dock E and F. It's really at the point that within the next 5 years, we've got like I said, we've either got a plan to do something or a plan to do nothing, and or find some kind of in between, whatever that is. But things are getting critical. It's everything from electrical to the actual state of the docks, and then also on the configuration. And so I think it's most efficient for us at a time when we've got to replace things, to make them right-sized for the life of that time span. Otherwise, it costs you a lot of money that's hard to define. But we're, due to the consolidation in the fishing industry over the last 50 years or so, our marina is not it's not configured properly for where the fishing industry is going to go. So that's the importance of those projects. But I'm not sure what other questions there might be. I'd be happy to answer anything. So.
Yeah, so in professional service, Port Dock 7 rebuild, electrical engineering, and the feasibility study, that's 1.2 million right there. And then in the projects, the projects are actually listed out for you. That's another 4.2 million, if I recall. No, 2.8 million. So that's what you're looking at. That's what's driving it up. again, we won't do all those projects this year. We would not have, unless we get huge grants to help us.
Well, and 2.4 million, those are the DOC 5 piers, so.
Correct. And only 1.2 are we putting out.
In looking at this budget, and Paula's budget message and written in what she said today is that you can't get a grant unless you have it in the budget. And there are several things that the staff is looking at grants for. And like Mark just said, we're not going to get them all. And so I had the same concern when I looked at the budget. And as I've gone through it, kind of realized that we don't know what, when we get to the end of this coming budget year, what it's going to look like. There's going to have to be decisions made about what you do and what you don't do, and depends on how much money you have. And so I had sent an email to Paula just yesterday, I believe, and one of the questions was, you know, what is the reserve cash that we are looking to keep? And it's been talked about before. Walter's talked about it. We have to have a certain amount of cash on hand for emergencies, for if we ever need matching funds, if we have the opportunity for a grant. And so one thing I thought of in looking at all the projects we may or may not do and grants we may or may not get, I kind of see sort of the buffer, sort of the stopgap being what is our minimum amount of reserves we need to have, and then we're going to have to operate above that to figure out what projects we do, what, you know, depending on what grants we get. So it's taken me a little bit of time over the past few days, this weekend, looking over the documents to kind of work through that, and so I just thought I'd put that 2 cents in there.
Yeah, and I would say, and I really want to do a calculation, but 1 million is our minimum in reserves. Would you agree with that? That's a minimum.
Yeah, as of right now, I think we have 1.2, and we probably want to stay very close to that. And the concept here, as I mentioned before, is that we have a very aggressive strategic plan in which we have $27 million worth of projects. And the only way we're going to get a lot of those projects completed is by having plans for most of them. And we need to start it somehow. And I don't want to just throw everything in a wall and see if it sticks. But at the same time, we got to make sure we start being a bit more aggressive about getting some of these projects completed. And in order to go out there, I hear a lot of people saying, well, you got to go get grants, you got to go get grants. Well, grants are great, but they only will give it to you if you have a plan. And I've been to several seminars in regards to that, and specifically seminars for financials for ports and grants for ports, and Mark has it too. We both attended some of those, and the reality is a good plan, even sometimes with a good plan, it may take a year or 2, sometimes 3 to get the grants you need. So we need to get those projects ready, the plans ready, and get out there and start applying. The better the plan, the easiest it will be, and the more funds you have available to match, the better chance you have. And that was one of the reasons we refinanced NOAA last year, or this current year, I guess. It was so we could start putting the monies aside so we could have that match. So now with the match, we don't have the full amount yet because those will be coming slowly, but we have ways to get loans and pay with the funds that we're putting away, and that can be used for matches. So there, we can technically, with the amount that we save, we could get loans for as high as $2.5 million right now to use as match. And with that said, we want to get started. We need to get those plans in place. And what this budget for this year accounts for, it's a lot of those plans. And even those plans, some of them we're going to be able to get grants for the plans. We have been talking to Business Oregon. We have been talking to USDA and some other folks. There are ways to get planning grants as well. And we'll try our best to you know, get those and be ready. But if there are, again, as mentioned before, if there are not in our budget, especially when you're trying to get public funding, they just won't give it to you. Because first thing they ask when you do the application is that in your budget. Again, if we don't receive it, we will move forward. We're not going to try to use all the funds we have on these projects. We got to make sure we have reserves and we prepare, because right now, for instance, we're going through a tough time that nobody was expected. You know, if we're having difficulties like some ports are, we would have nowhere to get money. So this is very important to have that reserve, because right now we could easily be using that reserve. We're lucky enough that our portfolio is diversified enough that we haven't lost as much money as some ports have, but that's the importance of having a reserve. So.
Any other questions of Mark? Jim?
Yeah, this probably will come out in the departmental reviews. I was wondering if there are additional staff within this budget, or is that increase just the adjustment to staff salaries?
As of right now, this only accounts for the current staff we have and replacement of staff that may go away, plus part-time. We do have some part-time that we hire, especially during busy season. Unless there's something I'm missing, Aaron, Mark.
Yeah, so yeah, we've moved the seasonal staff from materials and services up to our personal services budget. We save about 25% for the cost of a staffing agency. Reason we did that is we're doing all the work up front anyway. Staffing agency really was not doing anything for us. The other thing you see in that item is our expenses for insurance went up dramatically this last year. We have not budgeted historically for our HRA liability, which is our health reimbursement account. The port has a $67,000 a year liability. So if everyone in the port decided to use the HRA, the port would have a $67,000 bill. I budgeted quarter of that this year in our insurance, so that if someone uses that, we actually can cover that cost. So those are some of the reasons those line items have gone up. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else before we move on to departmental review? Okay, if we want to move on to administration in South Beach RV, Mark Brown.
You're mute, Mark.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk general administration. I want to hit the projects quickly. Some of the projects are the new headquarters building. We've estimated about $2.4 million for that. That is a ballpark figure at this point.
Mark, and if I can just say, I am trying to obtain a more realistic amount, because that was just something we came up with based on some past experiences, but I am trying to get an actual quote per square foot. I know Jim provided me an example with the aquarium, what they spend over there. So that amount may be much lower, but I didn't want to change until I had a more realistic number. And that is an important one because unfortunately that will have to come out of our general funds or most likely get a loan in which we will not pay back like a lot of our other capital expenses will be. So we'll try to get you hopefully soon get a more realistic amount on projection on that. But then again, if we don't use it, we don't use it. It's better to have high than low.
Exactly.
Just to reference, page 24 is a list of projects.
Yes, page 24 has all the projects in the priority that Aaron, I, and Paula, we scored them independently and put this list together, sat down. So it's a priority list 1 to 25 for general operating fund, and 25 is the NOAA lease fund projects.
And Mark, let me just say though that again, this is the staff did that based on safety reasons and some of the things that the users keep on requesting us to do. Some past agreements with some of the users. So there are several things that we use to come up with those, what we call a priority. But honestly, this list was very difficult for us to prioritize because a lot of the items here, we feel they are priorities. So, but obviously the committee certainly can look at it and based on what you feel like it should be a priority, come up with a change to that. Again, the three of us, based on the strategic plan and some comments in the past from the commissioners, we came up with that list. So again, you're certainly welcome to take a look at it and make any comments you may have.
Let me, in that list, so it's what is the project? The second column is what's the profit cost center, then the cost. Port GOF is general operating funds. How much is coming out of our general operating? Then the next column is how much do we expect to come out of grant funds? How much do we expect to come out of a loan? Payback. If we expect that someone is going to help pay this project off, that's what that column's for. Source of funds is if we've identified where we might get grant funds or a loan, and then a comments or description and notes on the project. Just to explain what everything is on page 24. So try to be thorough for you and give you an understanding. So back to page 17 on administration, I included a new financial system accounting software, recognizing that we're not ready. There's a lot of planning that we need to do, but we probably have 1 to 1.5 extra people because of our current software. And then our server for the port for $25,000. The server was installed in 2012. It literally could fail at any time. It's used at life. In fact, it's used past its life and it needs to be replaced. So for me, that becomes a really high priority. Let's see, insurance, hit the highlights. On line 16 of administration is insurance. It's at 221,809. Our insurance costs increased this year as we valued our property at the correct value. So if we had a tsunami and lost a port dock, we now have the insurance to replace it. Contract and support services at 107. I need to look at that and see the detail on that, because that would be the other one that I'd have a question on. But it's moving expenses into the right area is what it was. Any questions on that area before I move to South Beach? Seeing none asked. South Beach, I'm gonna focus on the RV park operations, which quite frankly, operations are most of the expenses in materials and services. So you see general operating funds, South Beach, that is made up of operations and of the RV park staff. The seasonal staff is both RV park. It's one RV park seasonal staff. The rest are in the operations area. We do expect a very strong showing as the emergency order lifts for revenues from the park. Our marina is nearly 100% booked. So we're going to have a strong revenue showing for marina this year. Not a whole lot of other in there to discuss. Again, professional services 340, that's made up of mostly planning for changes. Repairs and maintenance, we're going to have to reside the restroom over there. I'm sorry, Aaron, I know I'm hitting into you there a little bit. We're going to paint the shop over there, plus the facility that we lease. And so that is not considered a capital expense. So that's in repairs and maintenance. And miscellaneous expenses, that's disposal of vessels that we have to do. We had one this past year, and based on conditions of some of the vessels, we may have more coming in the future. And I'll ask for any questions and leave it at that.
Mark, this is Jim. You might have said this and I might have just missed it. So the seasonal staff, I see them called out. You have one in the commercial and then you have 1.25 in South Beach. But then you have permanent staff as with a 6.5 and an 8.5. Is that a temporary or a part-time staff, not seasonal in there?
No, the permanent staff is our full-time employees.
Right.
But in South Beach, that's a combination of the RV park and operations.
So it's divided in half.
Yeah, so you're going to see the staffing size in operations is about the same for the South Beach as it is for the commercial marina. They're very similar in size.
I guess my question was the 0.5 on each.
Oh, the 0.5 on each. Some of it is Andrew Meeks, who's now working in NOAA part-time.
Okay.
And for the RV park, I have to look at that, Jim.
Okay.
Let me just pull that one out. I have a spreadsheet on my other computer, and I'll tell you exactly what that is. I just have to open it up. Final budget, detail, RV park. This budget, I put together 3 spreadsheets that feeds into one spreadsheet. 0.5 permanent.
Mark, isn't that because sometimes we get some of the, I know the South Beach is definitely for Andrew that works in NOAA. And then the commercial marina, don't we have folks going on and off to NIT as well?
We do sometimes, yes. Yeah, that's NOAA. That's exactly what that is. Yeah, we have, the halftime for the commercial marina is the assistant harbor master. And I split their time between the commercial marina and South Beach. That's why it's halftime.
Okay, so it's not a part-time employee, it's just split. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I did that. I couldn't see us affording a full-time assistant harbor master for both the commercial marina and South Beach, so I split it 50.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so where are we at now? Are we on to Aaron with operations? Are we ready to do that? Okay,
Sure, I can, so I'm over on page 19 with some of these projects. As you pointed out earlier, I think the definition for each project is on page 24. As Paula mentioned, this is a really difficult list to prioritize because most of these things are not things that they're not want to do's. They're things that are critical. And so it's really difficult to identify the cost of not doing them. But that's what we've got to keep in mind with this stuff is that if we don't do them at some point, they're going to start costing us money in that they will result reduced revenue or possibly liability, whatever the case. And the revenue part is hard to identify here because we're talking mostly about budgeting for what things cost us. But so the Port Dock 5 projects to keep dock in working condition, that particular line item could be moved around if necessary. I think if I had to pick one that needed to be moved, that if we had to create some room, that one's something that we could probably live with. It's things like whalers, dock rods, things like that. Port Dock 7, the floats that are critical on Port Dock 7 are to the extent that putting dock rods in them and trying to hold some of those older floats together it's really not going to work, first of all, but secondly, it's not worth it. So this is more of a ongoing maintenance rather than a repair item. Port Dock 7 and 5 replacing a handful of pilings. We have that in there every year just to try to be able to give us some room if we have some pilings that fail and need to be replaced. Hoist dock electrical is the one that we've talked about before. We've got electrical lines that are run low enough that they get submerged during the high tides of the year, and that needs to be relocated before it gets to the point where it affects the ongoing operation over there. The forklift is one that we deferred last year. We're past the service life on 2 of our forklifts at this point. And again, those are what generate revenue at the hoist dock. Which hoist dock revenue is not necessarily in the grand scheme of things a huge line item for us in revenue, but if we lose the ability to respond with forklifts, we're definitely going to notice it very quickly at the dock. Electrical engineering, power up. So the electrical engineering, you'll notice on page 24, it's way up near the top of the list. That was something I felt was extremely important because we made a significant increase in moorage rates in the commercial marina last year that was predicated on the whole point that we were trying to get this project done. And I think we're going to be successful in getting the projects done. We're also going to be successful in getting the moorage rates where they're a livable degree for the port to continue getting a lot more projects done in the future. If we need to get this done because this is something that we specifically increased that rate for the purpose of doing. So if we can stick on that schedule and we should be able to have new power pedestals, within 3 years time, that'll be 50 amp instead of 30 amp because we're still using 30. And this is to use 30 amp electrical on a commercial dock. We're well behind the curve on this. This is something that needs to get done. So this is just the engineering for that project this year. That way in the following year, we can get the permits pulled and start bidding the actual work. Ramp tread replacement going down to Port Dock 3. That's a big chunk of fiberglass tread that's expensive but needs to get done because it's getting slick and that's a safety hazard. Port Dock 5, Commercial Marina, Port Dock 5. This is the Port Dock 5 pier. It's important to keep things straight. We got the Port Dock 5 pier. We're not talking about Port Dock 5 because that's the actual docks themselves. And then there's Port Dock 7, which is down here on the eastern end of the marina over toward the Embarcadero. But this particular project here is talking about rebuilding the Port Dock 5 pier, which is what we got the grant funding for. It's something that we also need to pull off this year. So I'm just skimming through everything else that we have down there. So those are the highlights that are on the list there. I don't really have too much further. I'm sure that as you start prioritizing things, I'll get more details that'll need to come out. But like I said, everything that's on that list on page 24, I shouldn't say everything. Most things are, if they're high on the list, they're at the point where we've got to start planning to lose those parts of the facility if we don't do something. And there's a definite cost involved in that. So lost revenues would be the result. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody's got.
Before any questions, I just want to highlight one thing that Aaron and I talked about yesterday. One of them is it would come from professional services, which is the plan for replacing Port Dock 7. And what we talk about it is the fact that if we decided not to move forward with this, and we really need to start thinking about other capital improvements we got to make to the dock in order to make the dock continue useful life, because it's reaching a point where it's either you replace or you pour a lot of money into making it useful. So those are things we have to think about it. And obviously the preference here is to move towards a plan to replace it, because again, some of those are becoming obsolete for the type of uses we need nowadays. So that's the only thing I want to add to that.
Jim?
Yeah, I have just maybe a clarification question. Under capital outlay and debt service, so you have a new forklift lease and you also have purchasing a forklift. Would that be either one or the other? Not both, or is it both?
That one is probably a question for Mark. This more than likely, I believe, has to do with the way that we capitalize that lease. Mark, is that right? Or
So under debt service, you're asking about the forklifts?
yeah.
Yeah, it shows under capital outlay, it looks like we're buying a forklift, and then under debt service and transfers, it looks like we are just going to lease one. I was wondering if that was, if they were separate or if it's cumulative.
This is the way that we have to budget. So we buy a forklift under capital outlay, and you'll show that we get a revenue of a loan for $80,000 to offset that cost. And then we have to spend the money to pay off the lease. It's a capital lease.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're actually not spending $80,000 of general operating fund. We're getting a loan, a lease, and you're spending $12,000 or $13,000 for that lease.
Okay. Thank you.
And we talked a lot about that because that 12 to 15,000, you really quickly in repair and maintenance, you really quickly reach that in 1 year, especially if you've got one that's like the one that we didn't replace last year. We had to go through the hydraulics on the lift and put a new ram in it and do several other things because it was worn out. So we were close to just in the expense on parts and labor on that forklift, we were close to a lease payment this year. Granted, it's, in the grand scheme, in the long term of that lease, it was $80,000 we didn't commit to. However, we still spent about that much just to maintain that old forklift that we have right now. So.
Any other questions? Aaron, did you have anything else? Are we ready to move on to the next item?
I think that's about it. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure, as we start to prioritize things. But just like like what Paula was saying, the reasoning that I have used with the Port Dock 7 project was something that made sense to me. But I don't have the outlook that everybody else does. I look at it like I figure if you're going to have to go through permitting on something, you're going to have. So if we needed to, say, for example, replace the floats on Port Dock 7, we're still going to have to get permits for that. We're still going to have a level of planning and engineering that goes into it. So those are costs. Those are basically what I would call setup costs to do the project. So if you're going to do a project that doesn't really meet your needs for the next 20 or 30 years, you're going to have to do some more work again. And so it made sense to me to look at this thing in a way that sets the facility up to be right sized for the next 30 to 40 years or so, because that's the lifespan of it, and go ahead and do that planning work now all at once, so you actually save a lot of money because you don't have to redo tasks later on. So I think if we departed from that overall look, what it would have to look like would be a planning cost that's going to be still about the same, but we're going to result in a facility that has maybe a quarter of the amount of usage that we otherwise would gain by planning it properly. I don't know if that, it's kind of hard to describe, but that's kind of the way I look at it.
Hey, Aaron, did you want to talk about the international terminal as well?
Regarding, so as far as projects go there, we've got that 9-acre lot. That's a hard one to, got myself unmuted, right? Yeah. That's a hard one to, I think, commit to doing, but it's because it's hard to identify what it's costing us right now. But the longer that we leave that property in that state of repair, the potential for growing wetlands exists. I hopefully will be able to get some work done here as soon as it dries out for us from the county that will reconnect the ditches out there so that it drains better. But we can definitely use that lot if it was graded properly, and even if it just had gravel on it. There are going to be some major needs in the future for when this the wave energy project gets going offshore. They've contacted us about needing large areas of laydown space for months at a time to be able to store decommissioned equipment that's going to be waiting to get moved out of the area. And then, of course, once you have that area graded and ready to go, it could be used for a vast number of other things as well. Whatever it is that you happen to need as far as space goes at the terminal, you have it there. And storage is one of the things that is priced about accurately, I think, as far as the going rate and what we're able to charge without people saying, nope, we're going to find a different option someplace else. So I think that as far as creating more laydown space for us, that's a good investment. But it's definitely something that needs to get done, and it continually gets put off simply because we just, usually it's a matter of trying to be able to pay for the projects that we have going on. But that's definitely necessary, and we don't want to fall behind on maintenance across the board anyway, because that's a fairly new facility. We want to stay on top of that. Asphalt maintenance is extremely important, because once it gets bad enough, then you're going to have to start working on the substrate, not just the top layer. So we need to stay on top of that. But yeah, any questions anybody's got, I'd be happy to answer.
One thing I can add to that 9 acres issue is at one point, I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but there are two alternatives for the use of that. One is trying to bring in one single large user, in which the port tried in the past. And that is all great if someone is using the terminal on a regular basis and also provides jobs to the area, and we certainly like that. However, And the lack of that, the alternative use, which actually could bring more revenue to the port, is to just improving the. It's basically improving the site ourselves, and the payback, it's actually way larger than a ground lease. A ground lease, it's very minimal payback for the port as far as direct revenue, because you're paying, you know, a cent on a dollar over a piece of land that is not improved. If you improve, on the other hand, you can pay, you know, you can get the same type of revenues we get for storage areas that we're getting for multi-users, you know, and that can be cargo users, can be, you know, the current users where we already have. I think it's better for us if we at least get that area improved, and if we in the long run get a long-term tenant, great. But I see that being an area that it could be useful for the port. We don't have much property at this point in time. The port has very little property, and that's one of them that we don't want to just let go to wetlands and things like that. So.
Are we ready to move to major projects overview with Paula?
Jeff, I have one quick question. On that page that we're looking at, the International Ship Terminal, line item 14 for insurance is a 0. I was just wondering where that was captured, maybe somewhere else.
That's a great question, because it's always been 0. It's been covered by the administrative budget is where it's covered under, and commercial marina. I'll look at that in the future, because that doesn't seem right either.
Okay, yeah, it just jumped out on me. That me.
Yeah, it's a good observation, and we will correct that, because I did look at it, and they're not paying their fair share on it right now.
Well, Paula, are you ready for major projects overview?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we pretty much talk about most of the major projects we have, but again, if you want to look at the page 24, the first 5 items are the items that, again, we internally prioritize for the reasons we already explained. Some of those have just been postponed over and over, such as the rogue seawall. That is very important that we move forward. We don't want to, again, have some liability in our hands. This could be not only liability for the port, but if we have problems that affects the building, we could lose a major tenant. And so it would affect that and jobs and a whole bunch of things. You know, again, number 2 of that item, actually number 3, I'm sorry. Again, it's that concept of eventually replacing Dock 7. I can't say how much, you know, the importance of getting that project moving forward, at least getting some plans on the table. I think that would be an easy project for us to discuss with the state, and trying to obtain a grant for the planning of it, considering it affects major uses here with the fishing fleet of Newport. So I think that is extremely important. Obviously, we already got the grant from the EDA to do Port Dock 5, so that one must move on. And again, you know, importance of getting a new building for the port headquarters, it's extremely important. But again, most, as we discussed before, a lot of these may a matter of safety, you know, getting things done so we don't have some liability in hands. We want to make sure that, and the reason we keep raising our commercial rates, and even though, you know, some folks may question why you're still raising rates when there's the COVID issue going on that it may affect some folks. Well, we find that the mortgage rates are usually a small portion of their costs, but at the same time, you know, we have to keep collecting, you know, or keep increasing that in order for us to maintain the dock, and part of maintaining the dock, it's included in a lot of these projects, and making sure they get done, so we're not just collecting, but we're giving back to those that are using the docks. Yeah, all the other projects are laid out, and some of those bring us revenues, or we're looking into ways to obtain revenues. Some of the plans that, again, it will help us in the future. Look in possibility of getting more revenues for the port, but that can also provide good uses for the new port area. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about any particular projects that is on this list on page 24.
Any questions? Rex?
Yeah, I had a question on, let's see, it was procure property with shed, NIT. Is that where you found out what was it, the little electrical shed there?
Yes.
is on the wrong side of the property line?
That's correct. We had a discussion with Ronda's on a possibility of the port realigning our property, you know, to make sure that the shed is on the wrong side of the fence, in other words. So, and they said they would consider that, but we had to make sure it's an item that is on our budget in order for us to make an offer to them. We came up with the amount of property that we would need to move in order to get that completed. So that is what is reflecting there. It needs to be done at one point in time. You know, if we don't do it today, we gotta do it tomorrow. But I want to make sure we get it done while we have another agreeable party, let's say it. So
Have negotiations started on a possible purchase of that property?
We had a conversation about it of approximately what would be, but we haven't put an offer on the table again because we didn't have that on our budget. But there has been an understanding that that may be a possibility.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? So I had a few questions. You know, I'll look at the list and I agree with everything like what Aaron's talking about, that you know, these aren't they're not wants, they're needs. But we can't do them all. I mean, I can go down the list and, you know, rogue seawall critical, you know, there's server critical. You can make a case for the critical need on most of these. So if we were to only get the grants that we figure we probably got a better than 50-50 shot on, which of these do we think we can do this year? I know that's kind of a tough thing because you hate to leave any of them off, but has the staff talked about, okay, if we don't get some miracle grant, which in this year with the state funds being the way they are, we probably won't. Which of these do you think we can do? Or at least do the steps on we need to this year?
Well, I would like to push to see if we can get the planning grant for the Dock 7 replacement. That would be one that I'm really hopeful. let's see here. Then NIT consultant, I'm not really sure if we're going to be able to get a grant or not this year. It's something that we have to see, because I know the state had already put a lot of money into that location in particular. At the same time, it may be for, because they already put money, they want to see that continuing. So I'm not sure yet until we get on the table with them and start talking about that. At one point, we did sit down with the Regional Solutions team, which included Business Oregon, and we did talk about planning grants. And what they have is they have some that can be grants, some that can be loans at 0%. And those are things that we can talk about it as well. So I'm not really sure. Again, my feeling is that we could probably get the Dock 7 replacement. We will most likely get the, if after the first scope work is completed with the Army Corps on this dredging work that they were doing here at the commercial marina, if they feel like it's feasible, they'll move on to the next step, which is listed here, and which will most likely get that grant, which is a 50% of the total amount. This, what we call it, a South Beach Expo, and what that is it's a planning for a possible building that could house events such as like the wine festival, the seafood and wine festival. And one of the reasons we start talking about that is because the chamber spend a huge amount of money every year, almost $200,000, in just getting temporary tents. And we're going like, why in the world, are they spending so much on something temporary? And we look into if we were to even get a loan to build something that is a little more permanent and have other events. We could have boating shows, we could have RV shows, we could have all kinds of things in there. And we could bring revenues to the port. And what the amount that we asking for here is for a planning to not only what kind of building we can put together, but the marketing for it. Is that something feasible? Is this something that we could actually make money out of it? Because otherwise it's not worth for the port. And when we had the meeting with the Regional Solutions, they thought, well, that's an interesting thing. If it is something that could bring revenues and we can show for it. And actually we talked to Rogue, and Rogue should show some interest in using that building as well. They at that point they said that they certainly we could look into getting some planning grant with them for that if we can show a good scope of work. So there's a possibility there. It is not something that we need, but again, it's one of those that it could help us obtain future revenues. Why not? We don't have many we don't have much land to develop around here, and this is one development. It could certainly happen.
Hey, Paula, let me ask you a question about that. So have you looked at the Commons project for the county over at the fairgrounds and kind of just eyeballed what's going on there and what you can do to leverage all that effort?
Yeah. That is certainly something that if we decide to even move forward with that and obtain some funds to get a project like that, before we start on this process, it would be important to get the city and the county involved, making sure that we're not trying to compete with anyone. What are we trying to accomplish here? What kind of projects, what kind of uses we're going to get out of these? Certainly not competing with hotels or, I understand that project at the Commons has been a difficult one, and, but we certainly would like to make sure that we have our stakeholders, a stakeholders discussion, because I know there's been some interest in the past for something similar in other locations, and those type of projects have died down. So again, not trying to revamp the debt, but simply trying to figure out ways to accommodate some of the things that are already going on here currently. So
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot or not, trying to pick which projects we think we could do and which ones we'll have to leave off, because I know it's going to be painful whichever ones we have to leave off that we really want to do but can't. But has there been talk amongst you all about what are the ones that we have to do no matter what this year, the ones that we, if at all possible, absolutely want to do?
Do we have to prioritize them?
we already prioritize it on our list. So if you look at our list, this is a list that Mark and Aaron and I prioritize accordingly. Now, you know, again, I don't think it hurts to leave all those there and again, we gotta obviously make sure that we keep our reserves, and we gotta make sure that we get the grant funds that we have intended to before we move forward. If they don't, the worst that could happen is either they will drop out completely if we find that they are no longer necessary, which I doubt, or we can move them to the next year. At least we, you know, at one point we had the intent of doing this year, but because of priorities, we moved them to next year. Maybe they become a priority next year. But I in my part, I don't see any hurt of keeping them on the list. And if we don't get to it, at least we have it there if the funds become available. That's my 2 cents.
Because you're going to just chase whatever ball happens to be the most promising one at the time, right?
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, and let's face it, it's not like I said before, we're not just trying to throw something in the wall and see if it sticks. All these projects have a reason, you know. They're important projects. Either they're providing us revenues, or they're providing a source of, you know, use for the folks that need them, or they're again keeping us from some liability. So what we listed here, again, you know, it's not that we're intending to push off anything, but if we do, that's quite normal. From working on budgets in the past, it's okay to have projects that doesn't get accomplished. You know, it's not unheard of. You don't have to get everything in your list done, but again, if they are not on your list, you're definitely not going to get them done. So we're at least trying to put them out there, and we'll chase some of those funds some way, somehow. And if we can make them viable, then, well, maybe the following year.
The reason I was asking my question is I'm just trying to get a sense of, you know, look at this budget, and there are increasing costs, and people see it in their businesses. The cost increase, but what you sell your product for, oftentimes you can't increase it by the same amount your costs are increasing, and everybody's feeling that. And so I'm looking at the budget, and I'm trying to get a sense of what can we reasonably expect to be done and still maintain our reserves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are we looking at, we think we can do?
I guess that's a question for Mark B.
Yeah, that's a valid question. And it's a difficult, this is probably the most difficult year to answer that question, given the current shutdowns. You know, I would say reasonably that we could accomplish, gosh, I can't even say what we could reasonably accomplish. I look at this list and I see reciting the restrooms over in South Beach. We haven't even budgeted. We said, oh, we're just going to pay for it out of general operating funds. And in my brain last night, because I was working there, I'm thinking, oh, why aren't we seeking a grant from ODFW for that? Because it's public use, you know? So there are things in here that we haven't said we're going to get grants for that we might get grants for. I would say if I had to choose, we probably won't do the conceptual design for South Beach RV Park. The reason is probably the funds won't be available for grants this year, given the shutdown. Number two, the return isn't going to be fantastic.
Not in the beginning.
We're already charging for that area. And then it's an area for the lower, this is a terrible thing today. You have different social economic groups. It's an area for a different social economic group to go to that still wants to fish. But the second part of that is we know we're going to have to replace all the underground. We know we're going to have to replace all the electrical at some point because the newer RVs just don't do 30 amp. All these are critical projects. That's the biggest problem. South Beach RV Park is not as critical as everything else. The accounting software, we know we're probably not going to do that. It's needed. It costs us a lot of money, but we're still doing planning. Aaron talked about the 9 acres. We will need that in the future. Replacing the manned crane, we probably won't do that this year. I see the benefit of it, given what both Aaron and Kent have talked about. But it's really difficult. If you take things off, it doesn't even give us the opportunity to seek funding to help us get these things done. And that's what we want to do, is seek that funding. I'll take even the steerable and trainable 2-yard containers. That's for the byproduct of the fish. The current staff are pushing that around, and when they push it around, we're risking injury because they don't steer correctly anymore. So how do you define that? Again, maybe we seek a grant to help us with that through ODFW because it is public use primarily. So it's difficult. Everything is a need.
As I said before, I think, in our priorities, I think I would say anything from bottom half, it's just more wishful thing for this year, but that we could possibly move on to next year. Where the top half, it's something that we really hoping that we can accomplish this year.
And in my commitment is to keep over $1 million, probably between $1 million, $1.5 million in reserves at all times. We'll be doing some cash flow analysis to make sure that we accomplish that.
One thing is, a lot of these are planning projects that you see on here that I think are critical that we get the planning work done so that we can possibly get the projects done in future years. But those planning projects, there's a lot of work that's already been done on a lot of them. And once if we get the right people on board for them and point them in the right direction, our involvement is going to be not onerous. I mean, it's going to be a lot more easy. It's easier to manage that type of thing than it is some of these other ones. A lot of these are accomplished at the harbor master level, so they don't necessarily eat up a bunch of my immediate time. But like the South Beach dryers, steerable dumpsters, Even lower level asphalt projects and things like that can be accomplished by the supervisors at these locations. NIT consultant to determine that. That would be a large effort on staff's part, because depending on so for example, the Port Knox 7 planning project, I've spent the last year doing a lot of the lower level planning, sort of the things that we're going to need to give to a planner and say, here you go look at this stuff, is already kind of done. As a matter of fact, for that NIT, that a lot of that stuff is done as well. And then they merely need to come back to us to make sure that they're steering on the right course from time to time. But I'd say the pilings at 5 and 7, Port Knox 7 and 5. I mean, I really think it's if we can avoid it, throwing more funds at Port Knox 7 in the shape that it's in. I mean, the pilings can be pulled back up and then put someplace else. They can be redriven, but it really, you get to the point where you're throwing money into this facility that really just needs to be replaced, and you're not going to get much of that money back. So it's tough to trim things off of here, but and like I said, if you're looking for something else, the other one would be maintenance projects on projects to keep dock in working condition. Exact projects to be determined. That's off of a list of dock projects that involve rod replacement and whaler boards and stuff like that. Those are heavy lift projects for the commercial marina crew. They're really difficult for them to get those done. Just a few dock rods that we did last year resulted in a number of workers' comp claims, because it's extremely tough manual labor at really odd angles working over the sides. So that's another one that's really difficult for us to accomplish, and we could probably afford to defer that for another year or so, not much more than that. I agree with what Mark was saying on it. The annex needs to be redesigned, but it's not like the original RV park, which was a great expansion and definitely an increase in revenue. The RV annex is going to be an expensive job because all that infrastructure needs to be replaced. We're going to add some capacity, because there's one corner on the northeastern side that is cut short, and that's because it's zoned differently. We'll be able to get a conditional use permit to be able to use that entire area for RVs likely. And that will be an increase in capacity, but that's about it. Other than that, it's going to stay about the same capacity, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we get grants for items 3, 7, 15, and 16. And let's say the summer goes pretty good, that the COVID doesn't, that there's some reopening, and that we have a pretty good summer, equivalent to last year. Do we have money in the budget to do projects 1 through 18 and still keep $1 million in reserves? I know that's not a fair question to just ask off the cuff.
If I had, you look at what's coming out of the general operating fund for those projects, and other than the Pier 5 rebuild, which is 1.12 million, nothing is a huge cost. 70, you have the asphalt at 95, 200 for the load centers for South Beach, and those are starting to fail. They haven't failed yet. You have the feasibility study. Paula, on that feasibility study for the commercial marina for larger vessels, Is there any state money available for that, do you think?
That is something we haven't looked yet. We've only been talking to Army Corps again. Some of those things that we can. Again, the only issue this year, again, trying to get funds from Travel Oregon and Business Oregon, and those is the COVID have really, hurt a lot of those funds in a way. So I don't know, although at this point, because they're trying to help a lot of the business and a lot of the ports, although I hear that they may have funds for ports coming from on the federal level, who knows. But it again, everything is changing with COVID. We just don't know. And I would like to keep it there with that concept that from the conversations we had with them, that those funds are available. But and funds are they have different pot of monies, like in Business Oregon, they have ports funds, they have capital funds for projects that are not port related, and then they have planning money, and they have marketing planning money for ports in particular, that very few folks tap into it. But those funds are there. And I think we could get some of them. And the only thing with planning that I can say is that if we have any projects, especially capital projects, that we have to do plans first, we are already postponing that project by a year just by having to trying to do plan, sometimes 2 years, depending, because then we may then have to go through permits and stuff. So what I don't want is for us not to have the plan in place and then wait another 2, 3, 4 years, because the longest we wait to at least get the plans moving, the longest we'll have to actually do the project. And that's the part that I'm a bit careful. And the concept here again is that we may not end up doing, even if we have all best intentions to get 1 through 18 done, for instance, for one reason or another, some funds of one or the other may not come through. We hope they will, we think they will, but and that's what things get offset, and that's why our funds are usually able to capitalize all of those. But again, the wish to keep them on the list and make sure that we don't lose opportunity, still pushing for those projects that we are prioritizing, but not losing opportunity if something comes out of the other projects that we're hopeful, and the funds become available. Because sometimes with those type of grants from the federal side as well as state side, I tell you, out of the blue, they decide to put out funds that you didn't know was going to be available, and often, but I don't, like this year there were a fair amount of projects from Marad and others that were like, we wish we had the plans together. We could apply for that. Some people are sending me, look at this grant, and I'm like, we'd love to apply, but we don't have the plans. There's no way we're going to get this type of project, especially when they're on the federal level, without the proper plans. And that's what I don't want to miss, is that opportunity to have the project in place, and if the opportunity is there, and have the plans in place to be able to continue applying when those opportunities come up.
And I agree, Paula, completely. And the answer, Jeff, is yes, I believe we could do that. It's about $1.5, $1.7 million. We have reserves of $4 million. We're going to spend $1.2 million on Pier 5. Now, it will be tight, but I think we can do it. Again, I'm with Paula in that keeping them on the project, on the list, gives us the opportunity to apply for grant fundings that can bring our costs down, and bring our general operating funding down to a level that we can afford more projects.
And we can't spend the money without authorization from the Port Commission either. Like
Yeah.
we still have to come back and say, hey, we'd like to do, you know, number 10. And so the Port Commission at that point in time could always say, it's not looking so good because we've done a couple of other projects or whatever the case. You know, I mean, anyway.
One more thing is we, again, the funds that we're saving on the NOAA bonds refinance, those funds are not immediately available because, again, this is going to be accumulating throughout the years to reach that $2.5 million. However, because we're putting that money on the side, and we're able to actually go to Business Oregon or whomever and get a very low interest loan and offset that with those payments that we're putting on site. So say if we get a $10 million project, you know, and we need to put 20%, that's $2 million. We can actually get a loan for that $2 million to offset that project. So that is something we could do. So in a sense, we could literally get most of these projects done if we go that route. If we find they're important enough, again, we'll bring it to commission. And if you find that, you know, that is important enough to move forward and through either grant or a loan, it's feasible.
So I understand the reason for keeping everything on the list. And I wasn't suggesting taking anything off. I agree 100% with keeping everything on. Grants may come up. Understand that completely, agree with it completely. I understand that projects have to go to the commission for approval. I understand all that. The reason I bring this up is I think it would be, it's just my opinion, it would be good if we come out of the budget process with everybody who's involved, and that's staff, commissioners, and freeholders, with sort of a general expectation of what the next fiscal year is going to look. If we, you know, sort of a best case, we get all the grants and we can do projects 1 through 18 and still have our reserves if we have a good summer. Worst case scenario, we don't get any grants. We have to take maybe delay 2 or 3 or 4 of those items we don't get grants for, and we can only do, you know, 14 instead of 18 items. It'd be nice to come out of this budget process with everybody involved with sort of a good expectation, and we can give the public an expectation, of course, dependent upon business still going well. I think we have a decent expectation on the summer, although there's still some variables there, of course. So that's why I brought that up. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I feel it's important to come out of the budget process with a general expectation, what we think we'll see. Anybody else have comments on that discussion? Okay.
Let's see, I did have a question on the new administration building. Is that projected cost of $2.4 million? Does that include purchasing real estate for the building, or is that just the building itself?
Again, this is a pretty high projection. I'm trying to obtain an actual closer projection from a builder here in the area. I was literally basing that on some of the buildings I helped build in the past 3 years and the cost of it. But it seems like the aquarium again had come up with a pretty good cost for the office building that they just built. So I'm trying to obtain a better number on that. That number, it's so far, it's only for the building itself. The projection here in the past, there's some old designs that were done 3 years or so ago, and that was to be built right here next to where the current trailer is at Dock 7. So if you drive in, they're looking into building right on the left-hand side of the driveway there as we drive in. So, and we had talks of even maybe looking at South Beach as well, where, you know, those buildings are behind NOAA. So there are some options there, but we certainly wouldn't be purchasing property at this point.
Okay. So do you have some kind of a projected design or size of building that you're looking at here?
Yeah, currently there is a design of a building that is about 4,500 square feet. And to be quite honest, when I look at that design, I feel like we already overgrown that design. My wish is to maybe project something for closer to 5,000 or so to give us a couple additional spaces, and in order for us to grow if we have to hire more people. And that projection basically includes 2 offices that would be leased out to third parties. There's been conversations with Customs as well as ODFW and others of a possibility of them leasing space from the port. What that would do is would help offset some of our loans, because that one we wouldn't get grant. Most likely we'll get low interest loans. I hear that USDA usually have low loans if a building is built for public use and not private use. So I think 75% or so has to be housed by the public, which in this case, even if we get ODFW and Customs, it would be. So.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? I had just some questions about personal costs, wage steps, PERS, that type of thing. I don't know if it's appropriate here or maybe move on.
If it's part of the budget, why not?
Okay. You know, I'll look at, well, I'll start with PERS. I had a number written down from last year and I couldn't find it. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of, it was over 600,000 in unfunded PERS liability. I saw another number this year that's less. And I don't have a handle, I don't have a concept of what our liabilities are going forward and what they could be. And I realize we're playing catch up in some respects on personnel costs and so on. But I'm also concerned that as we increase personnel costs or we increasing our PERS liability, do we need to take that into consideration? So I'm trying to put it in a concise question as far as what exactly is our unfunded liability. What does that mean? And what does that mean going possibly 5-10 years into the future?
So, Jeff, the unfunded liability is a calculation provided by PERS. And I went out last night, and as of December 31st, 2017, which is their latest statement, it's 495,296. The calculation is a tier 1, tier 2 allocated pool, transition liability, IAP calculation as more of the tier 1 and tier 2 retire, our liability will actually decline. I was reading a paper last night that shows by 2037, there should be very little to no liability. That's why IAP's around, because the liability was increasing. IAP doesn't require certain things to be funded anymore, therefore they're going to decline in the future.
And we only have four employees that are under that. So it's not a large amount.
Correct.
Okay,
And one of them will be retiring this fall.
okay. So my fears of the exponential growth we've seen, although it's relatively a smaller line item, my fears of this huge exponential growth is unfounded.
That's correct. It will not, it should be actually declining as we move forward.
Okay, that's helpful. I've looked at some of the personnel costs, some of the steps up. I know this, it's always probably the most personal subject is, well, the most personal subject is pay. And I realize some people are under market. And so it's I understand it's a very sensitive subject. At the same time, I want to look at it and think about, what's our responsibility in really looking at that, and how do we move forward?
I'm going to share that document I sent you last night. I'm going to put it up on the screen. If I can figure out how to do it. Share screen. Do you know how we do that, Karen? You're on mute.
Yeah, there's a
If
share
you
screen
hit
on the
share
bottom.
screen, you should get a window that shows what's open on your screen. So what you want to share, you want to have open already.
I do.
Yes.
And share
Share
screen.
screen, you should see your options of what you can share.
There it is, right there.
Yep.
Can everyone read that? That's what I sent Jeff last night. So you can see by position. The first 3 columns, 2020, 7/1/2020 was the wage, the hourly wage at that time. 1/1/2020, there was an increase. 7/1/2021 was the first step. So you're comparing apples to apples. Then current budget for position, which is it's a 2021, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 column of numbers. And then next to that is the market, the current market rates. So you can see where everyone's at versus current market rates. The current market rates, the mid rate, high rates, and low rates are based on experience of individuals and numbers of years in position, which I'd have to dig, and I was doing that late last night.
And as you can see, we try to be just above the low portion of the salary survey by HR Answer. I don't think we have anyone that has really reached even the mid salary range that HR Answer provided. We still feel sometimes that the maintenance, the jobs under maintenance it's still low even by HR Answers, because we have a difficulty finding people. So our tendency here is to err on the mid portion of that, because we're really having difficulty finding maintenance folks that can afford to live in Newport and only get paid the low range of the maintenance. But some folks were definitely very, very off what it should have been to start with. And if you talk to folks on ports similar size, you will see that is a true statement. It is a true statement for the directors. It's definitely a true statement. And even the maintenance side, we're definitely very much on the low side on that. And what you got to look at it is a couple things. One, if those folks were to go somewhere else, where would they go and how much are they offering them? Secondly is, can those folks even afford to stay here in Newport at that salary range, or or would they move to a different job opportunity that are sort of similar, even though it may not be port, but that can account for their experience? Where would they go and how much would they make? And all those things we took into consideration. So it wasn't fully just the survey, but the actual area that we live in.
And I have a tendency also to look at it like, where are you purchasing your labor? What market are you purchasing your labor from? Are we in terms of an automobile, are we looking for a Lincoln or are we looking for a Fiesta? And so if you keep in mind, where we are competing here, I think if you look regionally in comparison, so HR Answers drilled this down locally. If you look regionally, we're definitely at the lower end of the scale, and it's difficult to get people to come in. And it's just like Paula said, if you are moving, if you're like, oh, well, I want to move to the Oregon coast and I want to pay for a house or pay for a place to live. It doesn't have to be a house, it can be an apartment. You got to look at what's available and what it costs you to live here, or live someplace else and commute here, and what the transportation cost is and all that stuff. You really have to ask yourself, at these rates, are we going to be able to find people or not? Or how effective is it going to be? That's the way I always look at it.
I tried to spend a little bit of time tracking. I think I had the salaries from, excuse me. Had the salaries from the start of this previous fiscal year, but there was increases. You said January 1st.
Yeah, we had the $50,000 that was provided by the commission to be spread across, which again, a lot of people didn't really get much out of that.
Okay. Yeah, I recall that. And so I just kind of went and looked at percent increases, and there's some substantial increases from the start of this fiscal year to the start of last fiscal year. But so I'm kind of torn because I see that there are people being underpaid, but then also see the increase in personnel cost, and the question becomes, do we make that all up in 1 year? And then again, like I said, I know that it's a sensitive issue, pays the most sensitive issue there is to anybody. But also think about us being fiscally responsible and not having to cover everything in 1 year.
I understand that, Jeff, but I gotta say, if there's one area that I would like us not to trim down, would be in this area. And the reason being is, again, there were periods that, my understanding, I wasn't here, but there are periods where staff didn't get any raise whatsoever. And I think we're finally on a catch-up mode here. And there are a lot of projects that we're in a catch-up mode, so it's a matter of, where you're gonna go. And I think if we want to continue having good people here and not have to deal with losing staff year after year, I think it's we can slow down from this point forward and just be doing the typical merit and the typical cost of living. But I think at this point, when you are just trying to do that over something that is already way behind, it's a very difficult one. So my request would be not to trim down this one in particular, because I think it's very important for us to start with a good employees, you know, and make sure that everybody that is on board, it's feeling like we want them here, and that they can provide good service for us. And then from this point forward, we'll work as you know, just to done a regular mode, basically.
Okay. Thanks for that. One question related to that is looking at wage steps. And I don't know how to say this without, well, we'll pick out Director of Operations and Director of Finance. You know, I don't consider Aaron and Mark to be on the low end of experience or performance as far as steps. You know, they're sitting the first year in their position. I wouldn't think they would be on the low end of the steps for the wage steps. And I believe with what's budgeted, unless I looked at it wrong, they might be on and maybe some of the other employees might be on the lower end. And I don't know if that's appropriate. Does that make sense?
I'm not really sure. I mean, based on the survey, they certainly are on the low end.
Well, yeah, they are on the low end, but with the new wage steps, it, like, let's say, Director of Operations, the annual range for the wage steps is 102 to 146. With where, you know, Aaron's well below that now. If we bring him up to where it's budgeted, he's at like step 2 or something. Well, I don't consider Aaron step 2 on his job. So are the steps out of balance? Not what you're budgeting, but Aaron's higher than step 2. I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
Are the steps wrong themselves, the wage steps? Do we need to look at that?
Oh, right. Well, we, again, we're trying to do some proportionate increases here where we feel like at this point in time it's fair. We try to make sure that I know, you know, and we'll look at that moving forward by merits and by time in a job and things like that. I think at this point in time, we're trying to bring everybody where at least, you know, somewhat based on their experience, that they are at least beyond that low portion of the range on the survey. There's no doubt in my mind that, you know, Aaron's been here for close to 3 years, and he has an incredible experience in what he does. And, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that he's beyond that. But we're trying to only ask for so much, and we had so much to play with it. Now, you know, I had no problem giving him a little beyond that, but definitely not below.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the 102 to 146 wrong? I'm picking this one out as an example.
And that is this year's. Mark, can you address that, because we're changing that based on the survey, aren't we?
We did. I moved it up substantially from where it was, but the salary scale should reflect the position, not the individual. Right. So maybe instead of increasing it 3%, you increase it 5% to give it a different range. But we should start it off at the low end. Maybe it is a little low at 102. Maybe it should start at 104. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm trying to do it in a reasonable manner and not make everything up in 1 year.
Well,
it was a substantial jump how it was.
The wage steps are substantial.
Yeah.
Let's take any individual out of it, but the wage step change was very substantial.
Yes.
Where did that come from? the wage survey, the salary survey?
Yeah, the HR Answers put together. So we're told we're actually required to do this survey. And it's a new law that requires us to make sure that people are getting paid, fairly. So again, we are on a catch-up mode, and that's the reason you're seeing this major increase. Because again, we spend time without raises, or when they're given, there were cost of living based on already very low salaries. So for the longest time, we're just weren't catching up. And now we're all of a sudden on a real catch-up mode. I know it's difficult to explain to folks, and I know this is a public entity that has to, to make sure we're not overpaying our folks, but at the same time, the survey shows that we're not, that we are, again, we're not bringing people to even the mid-range, we're bringing people to the lower range of that.
Okay, so that salary survey, is it something that that can be sent to the budget committee? Is it a
Sure.
public report, and does it have the data that it's based on? In other words, does it have the different positions at the different ports or public entities, or I don't know if it has private entities?
Well,
Is it
they don't
raw
specify the entities. It's just the general for the region, but it does have a date when it was done, which it's been almost a year now at this point. So it's already a year behind that survey, but certainly we will be happy to share that survey.
Okay. Okay. And I'm sorry to take up so much time, but
If there's a question, it got to be answered.
okay.
And I still look at these in a practical sense. Like I said, surveys aside and all that, if you suppose for a moment that you're, I don't know, put yourself in whatever position in life you prefer, and then look at the wages and figure, if you're put yourself in the shoes of the person who is hiring themselves out for work, and think about who is going to be attracted by these type of wages in this in the current, what our cost of living is for this area. Like I just had a conversation the other day. We got we have we're getting ready to hire another position right now, and I got a call from a guy a little while back who had experience working at the mill in Toledo, and would have been a great employee, but we're not anywhere near what he is capable of making elsewhere. And it's not because his qualifications were necessarily different. It's just because he's a different quality. His qualifications were not necessarily extremely high. It's just he's better at marketing himself, and it's just what are we looking for? What do we want our workforce to look like, and what experience level are we looking for? And we need to adjust our what we're paying folks to be able to purchase labor at that market level, I think. And if we've got super high expectations of what the port needs to be doing, or we've got even high expectations or whatever, you pay in that range. And if you've got lower expectations of what the port needs to be doing, you pay in that range.
I think you get what you pay for. That's what the bottom line. If we want good employees, we got to pay them what is fair, and otherwise we'll attract people that it just doesn't measure up. And something we have to definitely take into consideration.
I appreciate all that, and I agree with the comments Paula just made and that Aaron just made, and I understand that. Just figure it's our responsibility to sort of do due diligence in looking at this as it comes through, and I value and weight the comments that Paula and Aaron and Mark are making. I do probably my outstanding question on this is the wage steps as it's related to the salary survey. And I would like to see the salary survey and the raw data that goes into it.
Sure. We'll be happy to, as soon as this meeting is over, we'll send copies to all the members of
Yep.
the.
I have it on my screen already.
Okay. I see, I just noticed that Walter's joined us. Walter, did you have any questions or concerns you wanted to bring up to this point?
First I'd like to apologize to everyone. I got a call early this morning and I've been out digging in a stream, getting a tree out of our intake pipes, so I was not able to join us. And the only reason I'm clean is I washed myself up, so I was no longer freezing to death. I'm not gonna try to join this in the middle of the conversation. I would just reiterate what Jeff said about the survey and these large jumps. I think, we brought this up at the last commission meeting where we did the review. And, like I said, I think we need to manage perceptions and look what the public sees about us giving these large increases out in the times we're in right now. And just, we need to be fiscally prudent and give that appearance. And I also understand not paying our employees and how that looks also. We're kind of in a conundrum. But if those were based on that survey, I think I wish we would have had that last week when this came out, so we could kind of get a better idea of where those numbers came from. So, thanks.
So we are on our agenda. Really, we finished major projects overview and we went into it's supposed to be concluding comments and committee discussion of budget. And we kind of really already did that in effect. But is there any, before we move on to public questions and comments, is there anything we want to go over or any comments people have or things they want to dig into? Rex. Rex, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a question for Mark Brown there. Do you think the port will be able to raise enough revenues to justify this proposed budget for the next year?
My belief is yes, or I wouldn't actually propose it. I believe we're in a position right now that we can do this. The unknown clearly is the COVID-19 and what that's going to do to the commercial and South Beach revenues ongoing. But as we start to come out of it, I think we'll be in good shape. Historically, what I've seen is recreational isn't hugely adversely affected by this because people want to fish. I don't know the commercial marina side well enough to comment on it, but I think we're going to be fine. I wouldn't propose something if I didn't think we could not do it. Aaron, what do you think on the revenues from the commercial international terminal side?
Well, I think most of it comes from moorage revenue. So that's going to remain relatively static. It's the services are the most elastic of those revenues because it responds to the market. The moorage will probably not fluctuate very much because if the boats are here, they're here. It would be. I think that would change if you saw some sort of major thing happen where a bunch of boats decided to exit the market and remove their boats or stop paying bills for some reason. And even in that particular instance, when you're talking about a moorage bill, for a 60-foot boat, currently they're paying about $3,000 a year, which is in terms of the rest of their expenses. I mean, it's not one of their top expenses by any means. So in any case, I think it's going to remain. It's fairly easy to predict what that'll look like. Services would be one of the things that would be the most questionable right now, and that's not that's over here in the commercial marina. It's not as large of a percentage of the revenue as mortgage. Obviously, the terminal, that's services are a fair amount of the revenue out there. Storage, I think, is the number one source of revenue, if not number two. I think that's going to stay about the same. So I think it's going to be relatively static. It may be impacted a little bit, but since it's a lot of it based on mortgage, I think it's going to stay about the same.
So yeah, then we'll be able to do it. The budget will be managed to make sure that we keep at least 1, if not 1.5 million in reserves. That is critical moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Jeff. So basically, I just found my comments, and like I said, I don't want to back the bus up. So these were comments I had prepared. So I guess this is the right time. I just want to make sure that moving forward, that unrestricted NOAA fund does not get used for anything in for any projects. That's money's been put away for a good reason. I had a question for Mark. What percentage of drop in revenues were you basing this budget on?
I looked at about 5 different scenarios. And it depends on which area of the port you're looking at. I think we're seeing about a 5 to 7% drop in South Beach right now, the RV park. In the marina, we're seeing no drop at all. In fact, we're seeing an increase in revenue. Aaron just addressed the commercial marina. There's very little impact to the commercial marina. There's been very little impact to the international terminal. So it's really only commercial marina, or excuse me, the RV park you're seeing a drop in, about 5%.
Okay, thanks. And the other was, has there been any movement or any work done about contracting some of the services we provide out?
It depends. It's an individual. It depends on the service you're looking at.
Yeah.
Contract. If you look at many of our capital projects this year, many of those would be contracted out, but not all of them. Okay. That's a decision Paula, myself, and Aaron sit down and discuss and figure out what's the best way to achieve a project getting done with minimal risk to our employees.
Okay. Yeah, my past conversations, we talked about forklifts in that whether or not we should look to hire people to do that, or if it'd be better off contracting that services out, seeing how far we are behind. And that's just, and I brought that up last year, and I just didn't know if that had been looked at for this year's budget.
I did not examine that for this year's budget. There's a little money for that, not a lot. It's mostly in personal services right now.
Okay.
I would say in general, if it is something that can be done by our staff, I rather keep that in-house because we have more control of it. Mm-hmm. However, there are professional services that I think, in order for us to get the best out of a out of a project, it's good to have people that are professional in those areas. Mm-hmm. There's no point of us trying to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of projects that we can try to manage, but we're probably going to be spending so much time researching how to do it that it will be so much easier to get a professional in that area to, help us through. And that is the case for instance, trying to manage the Dock 5 project. You know, we're not professionals in that specific area, and making sure somebody is helping us control everything, and that we have all the right answers to the federal grant provider. It's very important that we don't miss steps, and we have, you know, someone that is understands all the processes and the permits and so on and so forth. So things like that, those are areas that we most definitely try to contract out, make sure that we have the right people in place.
I think something that's important to mention here is what we're charging on port labor. Regular for a regular hour is $58.80. For overtime, it's $88.20 an hour. Even encumbered with the wage steps, which is what we were just looking at, if you're paying somebody $18 an hour plus benefits, and you're charging $58.80 an hour, I think we still have room in there. And then of course, Mark's done a lot of work on the overhead. So, you know, I think we also have to look at how are we able to capture. I mean, billable services is a great place to be able to capture that that overhead, because, you know, accounting staff is vital, but they don't bill their services out, so they cost us money. And so where do you capture that? And you know, if you re-rack everything, I guess the question is going to be, you outsource at the point where you figure you could put yourself in a better economic position. And certainly the concept could be looked at, but generally speaking, there are clear textbook rules about choosing when to outsource an operation. And when you are heavily invested in that operation because it's your front door or it's the service that you provide, you usually don't choose to outsource that, because that is the mark that people judge you on. So if you're in the service of providing, if you're in the business of providing dock services, outsourcing those services would be one of the last things you would want to do, because that's the thing that you are delivering to the public. You wouldn't be more likely to outsource things like what Mark was saying, changing of dock rods, things that require a higher level of specialty knowledge, things that require oddball sort of competencies that you don't maintain organically. Those are the things that you choose to outsource.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I just wanted to know if we were getting a return on investment for, you know, leasing all these, the equipment and, you know, the training we're providing. And I'm not against providing the training or getting good employees. I just want to make sure that we're getting a return on our investment, that we're seeing an actual increase in our revenues from that investment.
Yeah, and it's a good question, Walter. You know, the fully loaded cost would be about 32 before overhead.
Yeah.
And we're charging 58. So we're recovering some of our administrative costs in that too.
Okay.
And so we're good.
Okay. And then just two last things. Just we just need to. It was kind of Rex brought this up about creating new revenue sources. You know, we basically raised rates and refinanced our loans, and we haven't brought in a significant new source of income yet. And just we need to look to that. And as far as the event center, I was prodded a couple days ago by someone who's been around for a long time to remind everybody that we had a mayor recalled of an event center on the port property, and that we might lose the character of our marina if we put an event center in there. So that was it. Thank you, and once again, sorry for being late. I would much rather been here than where I was at an hour and a half ago.
Okay, anybody else? All right, so I believe the last two agenda items are public comment and approval of budget. And that approval of budget it's either that or schedule an additional meeting. So we'll talk about that when we get to that last agenda item, whether we approve or schedule another meetings. But first, public questions or comments. I don't know if we have any public on. I don't believe we do we?
Karen, I talked to Karen and asked earlier, we didn't have any. Has any new comments come in, Karen? You're mute.
Look at
Okay.
my email real fast. And I imagine there's nobody in the waiting room, Mark Brown?
No, I have not seen it. No one's in the waiting room.
And I do not have any comments in my email.
Jeff,
Yes.
what's not on our agenda is the rates and fees increase. It's my fault for not putting it on there. But so my quick comment is, this is a standard increase of 4%, except for the mortgage, which was a pre-agreement that Aaron had with the commercial marina. Everything else is what we should be doing every year. There's a cost of living increase every year. The cost of our services, the cost to buy anything we need for the port goes up. These increases are just to cover those costs.
And one thing I have to add is that I did send a copy of those rates over to Heather Mann to see if she could distribute it to the commercial fishing users group in the event that they would want to send in any comments to this meeting. So I haven't heard anything, so.
And in general, there's been, oh, I'm sorry, Rex. Did you want to say?
One question on that port-wide rates and fees there under international terminal tariffs under line item B, materials and supplies. Fiscal year 2019, you had 25 cents. 2020, you had 25%. And then 2021 is 25 cents. Is that just an error there, or what are we looking at there?
NIT.
Page 32.
32. Materials and supplies. Aaron, do you know that one?
Yeah, so this was the subject of a lot of discussion last year. It was what rate we're supposed to be, what we ought to be charging people for if we have to, like for example, let's say they need an aerial work platform and we have to go out and rent the aerial work platform and bring it down there for them. What do we charge for that stuff? And so I think the 25%, I don't know what the 25 cents was.
Yeah.
Unless it was 25 cents on the dollar, which is 25%. So I think that 25% mark was what we figured out last year. We should be charging, for that sort of thing, or if we need to buy extra, or if we need to rent extra porta potties because somebody's gonna do some kind of operation down there. It's things like that.
So it should be 25%.
Yeah, I just wasn't clear on that looking at the numbers.
So the one feedback we did get was labor for the small forklift. We heard from several commercial fishermen plus the user group. And so we've changed how we do that this year. It'll especially positively impact the smaller vessels. And so it's billed differently for that first hour to reduce the cost for that first. So if they need to load bait, they don't get charged 115. They get charged about 68. So we did fix that based on feedback.
So if we choose to approve the budget per the sample motion, the rates and fees are part of that, correct?
The commission has to approve the rates and fees. So I think it's an approval, and this is a guess. And Paula, it looks like you may have a positive answer.
No, I would believe that you need to, because again, we're only dealing with the budget and it's not any different than all the other suggested fees that we have. So at this point, you can approve with that concept of those rates, but then you need to bring it to the commission, the rates itself to be approved by the commission. I would imagine that's how we.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
May I add something?
Okay.
Yes, please.
So there's a resolution to adopt the rates and fees. There's also a resolution related to the salary steps that would be part of the May meeting before the budget is actually adopted in June. So you're approving the budget in general, but those will actually be adopted as separate resolutions.
I agree. That's exactly how I was planning on doing, is to bring those, each one separately under different resolutions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Karen. The Secretary Treasurer concurs.
Okay. All right, so do we want to move into discussion of approval of the budget? Anybody have any comments at this time? And mainly, I guess we're looking at, do we approve or do we schedule another meeting, and what would we hope to accomplish or need between now and then?
Paula, this is Walter. Did Gil send any comments on the budget?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Did Gil have any comments on the budget?
No, Gil did not have any comments, no. I only got comments from Jeff, in which I answered yesterday. I shared that with Jim and Jeff, some of which was brought into this meeting. I don't know what happened to Gil.
Okay. Seeing as he's an economist, I would prefer that he have a little more input on this, especially if he didn't approve. Send in any comments. That would be my only concern.
Anybody else? Discussion of approval or scheduling another meeting and what we would hope to do? What opinions?
Yeah, I guess the main thing we would want is probably some feedback from Gil. I noticed Mark Farley left. Do we still have a quorum? I guess we do, because Walter joined.
Yes, because Walter joined.
Okay.
We have Dave, Walter, James, Rex, JJ, and Jeff. That's 6.
I'll just throw a comment out there. If we were to have another meeting, what I would look for, in addition to Gil's participation and input, would be to get the salary survey in advance to help inform, provide context for the wage steps. And the other item would be what I referenced earlier, and Mark Brown did speak to, would be what we can reasonably expect, maybe under best case and worst case scenario. Best case being we get the 4 grants that were discussed, and the summer goes at least as good as it did last summer for business. You know, what could we get projects 1 through 18, and what would be our reserves at the end of that? And worst case would be we don't get any grants. In the summer, we see the 5 or 10% drop, or whatever you think it could, what our worst case scenario would be. What projects would we get done? It would be nice to kind of have an expectation of what the year would look like. That would be the the three things I could think of: Gil, salary survey, and then just sort of a best case, worst case on business and what projects we could do. That would be what, if we had another meeting, what I would propose we look at. But in general, I do want to say I appreciate the work that's been done to this point. I think Port staff's just been doing a bang-up job, and I really appreciate a lot of the moves to put the port in a better position and really think long-term. And I think this budget does that. The actions leading up to this and this budget, and Aaron spoke to it about the planning you need to do in advance and saving money in the long run to really do it right and think long-term. And I appreciate all the effort that's gone into this. And so I'll leave it there, see what anybody else has to say.
If we do have another meeting, do we have an idea when that would be, and would it be the same virtual meeting like this as Zoom meeting?
What I would assume is we could do this 3 different ways. We could come up with a time right now. We could do right before our other commission meeting, which is the next, the 28th, I believe. Or we could send out a survey to see when it works for everybody, and that's probably the best alternative. It's to have Karen send out everyone a survey asking, giving some options of dates, and making sure everyone can participate.
Okay. I leave for Alaska on the 21st, and I won't be back until the 1st of August, but
okay.
The virtual one, I might have access to internet to be able to join the meeting, possibly. So.
Yeah, and you would most likely be virtual at this point in time, because I think we're trying to get this done pretty soon, and with the restrictions on this social distancing and all that, I think we're still good for more virtual meetings for upcoming meetings, I would suggest.
Okay, thanks.
If we have another meeting, I would recommend I believe Paul just referenced it, but do it sooner than later. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think we might be close.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. I'm pretty comfortable with this budget and the work that's gone into it. I don't have anything that needs to be changed or needs to be revisited in all that much depth. I think we did a pretty substantial job going through it. So if we do decide to wait, it's really, I guess, mostly for a little clarification of those scenarios and to get Gil's input.
So I don't know if we want to, if nobody has a motion to or discussion on trying to go ahead and approve the budget, maybe we should look at just getting a scheduling the meeting as soon as we can, sending out the poll, doodle poll, or however. I don't know if we need to take a vote on anything or just, does anybody have any objections to doing that?
I did not, Jeff.
Okay. All right. And so are we ready to move on to just discussion of approval of tax rate? Let's see. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay. Anything else before we talk about the last item? Okay, so the approval of tax rate, if we're not approving the budget, do we, or can we go ahead and approve the tax rate or at this time, or should we just wait on that?
you can approve the tax rates separately if you desire, or we can wait until we can have a discussion and approve it with the rest of the budget. It's whatever you as a committee prefer.
Okay, so if anybody wanted to make a motion, they could, but don't have to. And the sample motion is on the agenda if somebody chooses to do that. Page 3.
Seems most logical to wait and do it all at once, in my opinion.
Okay. All right, so any other business before we adjourn? Anything else we need to say? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Meeting is adjourned at 10:48.
So we will get out something to everyone to get this next meeting scheduled. I'm not sure what type of notice we have to give. I'm looking back to Mark. Paris.
The same notice as a regular meeting of the governing body. Subsequent budget committee meetings.
So just a regular meeting notice is what we have to give out as of the governing body notice. So Karen has that. So we will get that set up and get the next meeting set up for you. And you'll shortly have the salary survey information.
Can we make sure the salary survey makes it on the website too?
Yeah.
Thanks.